Welcome to the Monsters Among Us podcast. This is episode 23, The Yeti. Today, we're plunging straight into the really chilling side of the Yeti legend. We're talking about the scary stories, the accounts that have made this creature such an enduring figure of fear in the Himalayas.
Absolutely. And what's so compelling about these scary Yeti narratives is how deeply they're woven into the fabric of Himalayan culture. It's not just some random monster. It really taps into ancient anxieties about the wilderness, the unknown, what might be lurking up there.
Exactly. So our goal today is to really, dig into these frightening accounts, look at the common threads, what makes them stick, and maybe get a better sense of why the Yeti still gives people the chills. We've got stories from way back, folklore, right up to more modern encounters. So let's jump in. The earliest whispers. They go back even before Buddhism established itself there, right?
That's right. You have indigenous groups, like the Lepcha people, who had these long-standing beliefs about powerful, non-human entities in the mountains. These weren't necessarily Yetis, as we label them now, but powerful beings of the wild.
Okay.
Then, as Buddhism spread, these existing beliefs kind of merged. The Yeti often got folded in, sometimes seen as just non-human animals, sometimes even as guardians against negative spirits. But interestingly, seeing one, or even just hearing one, that was generally considered bad luck.
Bad luck, right. That adds a layer of dread immediately, doesn't it? Even if it wasn't outright hostile, it was something ominous.
Precisely, like a disturbance in the natural or spiritual order.
Now, you mentioned texts. One source points to the Manati Kambum, a very old Buddhist collection. Does that offer any scary clues?
Well, the Manikambam, which is centuries old, talks with the Mate. It describes this two-legged creature that's somewhere between human and animal. It suggests a shared but distant ancestry. It's one of the earliest written hints we have of a bipedal, maybe human-like thing in that region. And that ambiguity, not quite human, not quite beast, that can be inherently unsettling.
That almost human quality is often the scariest part, isn't it?
Yeah.
Then there's that story about the Buddhist leader and the Yeti. Starts off kind of helpful, but the follow-up is, pretty creepy.
Yeah, that one's fascinating. The tale goes that a holy man was meditating, struggling, and a Yeti helped him out, brought him food and water.
Ugh.
Seems positive.
Yeah, surprisingly so.
But then, supposedly, when the Yeti died, the leader took its hand and scalp as relics. And these were kept at the Pangbosh Monastery for centuries.
Wow.
Having these physical remains treated with reverence, it must have made the Yeti seem incredibly real. And honestly, the idea of a mummified scalp in hand is just quite macabre.
Definitely the stuff of nightmares.
Right.
A physical piece of the mystery. Now, the local tradition, they don't just talk about one kind of scary Yeti, do they? It seems like there are different categories.
That's a really important distinction, yes. The folklore breaks it down.
Yeah.
You've got the Teima, often described as smaller, maybe 4.5 feet tall. Then there's the classic Yeti, which might mean rock animal or something similar. That's your typical 6-foot bipedal creature.
Okay, standard image.
Then it gets scarier. There's the Zute. This one is known for being aggressive, attacking livestock. It's usually described as walking on 4 legs, but capable of standing on 2. And then there's the Nyalmo.
Nyalmo. That sounds ominous.
In some tales, the Nyalmo is truly monstrous. Walks upright, but reaches like 14, maybe even 20 feet tall. These larger, more aggressive types, especially the Zute and Nyalmo, they really embody the fear of dangerous, unknown predators out there.
20 feet. Okay, that's firmly in monster territory. Now, briefly, Alexander the Great comes up in some sources. Any scary Yeti connections there, or is that something else entirely?
It's tenuous, really. The stories about Alexander's campaigns around 326 BC mention encounters with hairy people who used primitive weapons. Some try to link it to Yetis, but these people were also said to live in dwellings and wear skins, which doesn't quite fit the typical elusive Yeti mold.
Right. It sounds more like isolated tribes, maybe.
Possibly. There's another story that Alexander wanted to capture one, but the locals said it couldn't survive at lower altitudes. So these tales suggest awareness of unusual beings, but a direct line to the scary Yeti legend we know. It's pretty speculative.
Okay, so more about the general mystery of the region back then. Let's move to when Westerners started really exploring the Himalayas. This seems to be when the fear factor, the scary encounters really ramp up.
Yes, that's a definite shift. Brian Hodgson's account from 1832, even though it was secondhand, is a prime example. His guide saw a tall, dark-haired, tailless creature. And their reaction wasn't curiosity, it was sheer terror. They called it a Kako demon, or Rakshas, basically, a demon, and just fled. That tells you a lot about the ingrained fear.
Calling it a demon. Yeah, that's pure fear talking. Then Lawrence Waddell in 1899 finds those big ape-like footprints. He was skeptical himself, but still.
Exactly. Waddell thought it was probably bears, and he was pretty dismissive of the Yeti idea overall. But the fact remains, a Western explorer documented large, unusual tracks. It planted a seed, you know, maybe the local stories weren't just stories.
Right. And then Tombazi's sighting in 1924, that one sounds more direct, seeing a human-like figure walking upright, but he tried to explain it away, too.
Kambazi's account is really interesting. He saw something, clear as day, that looked like a human figure moving oddly at a distance. Later, he found footprints he described as man-like but smaller, but his own conclusion. Probably just a wandering ascetic, a hermit.
Huh. Rationalizing the unknown.
It's a common reaction. But for someone already believing or someone hearing this story later, that same sighting could easily sound like a terrifying brush with the Yeti.
Makes sense. But the moment things really exploded, the fear going global, seems to be that 1951 Eric Shipton expedition and that photo.
Oh, the Shipton print. Absolutely pivotal. That clear, large, bipedal footprint in the snow, high up on a remote glacier. It looked like undeniable proof to so many people. Proof of something big, something unknown, something potentially dangerous lurking, where humans struggle to even survive.
It's such an iconic, eerie image, and Tenzing Norgay, the Everest hero, his name gets linked to scary stories too, though maybe his account changed a bit.
Tenzing's involvement definitely added weight to the fear. Some early reports suggested he'd seen one himself, but he later clarified he hadn't. What he did talk about, though, was his father hearing these terrifying screams high up in the valleys while herding yaks.
Screams.
Yeah, blood-curdling screams attributed to the Yeti. That paints a picture of a frightening, unseen presence, doesn't it? Something vocalizing aggressively in those desolate places.
It really does. And it wasn't just his father. Lord Hunt's big Everest expedition in '53, the successful one, they also reported hearing tremendous screams at night, and it seriously spooked the Sherpas.
Precisely. These weren't novices. These were experienced climbers and Sherpas who know the mountains intimately. When they hear something that unnerves them, something unfamiliar and terrifying, and the local guides who live there get nervous, that really underlines how powerful and scary the Yeti legend was and is.
Okay, so centuries of scary folklore, building fear with Western encounters. What about more recent times? The Monster Quest show did an investigation, didn't they? What scary stuff did they find?
Yeah, Monster Quest focused specifically on reports of aggression, Yetis attacking livestock, or even people. They interviewed a Sherpa woman who gave this really harrowing account.
Oh, what happened?
She described a Yeti attacking her yaks, killing 5 of them by breaking their necks to snap them. And she also talked about this intense, terrifying feeling of being watched, even feeling physically assaulted by this presence.
Wow, breaking necks. That implies incredible strength. And that feeling of being stalked. That's terrifying.
It really is. It reinforces that image of the Yeti not just as elusive, but as a potentially violent predator. Peter Byrne, who spent decades researching Yetis and was on that show, he also stressed how deep the Sherpa's fear runs. They describe it as a primate, something that lets out these awful screams in the night.
So the screams are a consistent theme. Did the Monster Quest team find any physical evidence themselves?
They did find some footprints about 5 inches long, quite high up, almost 12,000 feet. Initially intriguing, but they were cautious, acknowledging they could potentially be distorted bear tracks. You know how snow can melt and refreeze.
Right, the misidentification problem again, which links to Reinhold Messner, the famous climber. He had a scary encounter he thought was a Yeti, but now thinks differently.
Messner's story is really compelling. He had a genuinely terrifying run-in with some large creature in the Himalayas. For years, he thought it might be the Yeti, but later, after more research and reflection, he concluded it was almost certainly a Himalayan brown bear or possibly a specific unidentified subspecies. Yes. His theory is basically that early humans in the region competed with these powerful bears for food and shelter. This generated a deep, primal fear, which over centuries might have morphed into the legend of the more supernatural, monstrous Yeti. It grounds the fear in a real, dangerous animal.
That's a plausible angle. Real fear of a known predator getting amplified into legend. But then you get accounts like the Japanese expedition on Dhaulagiri in 1971. That one sounds harder to explain away.
That Dhaulagiri encounter is certainly one of the more unsettling modern reports. The team reported hearing these strange, eerie quah sounds consistently through the night, a constant weird noise that made them feel watched.
Quah sounds odd.
Very odd. And then the expedition leader, Mitsuhiko Yoshino, claimed he saw a hairy bipedal animal at relatively close range, but he was apparently so frightened, so stunned, he couldn't even raise his camera to take a picture.
Wow, frozen by fear. A direct sighting combined with those constant weird sounds. You can see why that would deeply disturb them.
Absolutely. It feeds directly into that narrative of a mysterious, potentially frightening creature actively present in the environment.
Now, before we wrap up, we should probably touch on a couple of other things, often linked to scary Yeti ideas, even if incorrectly. First, that Dyatlov Pass incident. Sometimes the Yeti gets dragged into that, doesn't it?
Ugh, yes, that's a tragic mystery in its own right. The hikers found dead in the Urals in 1959. But the idea that a Yeti was involved is, well, it's pure fringe speculation, completely unsupported by the actual investigation findings.
Right. The likely explanations involve natural events like an avalanche, maybe katabatic winds causing panic.
Exactly, things related to the extreme environment. Unfortunately, some sensationalist media, like a heavily fictionalized Discovery Channel documentary, latched onto the Yeti angle because it makes for a dramatic, scary story, even though it exploits a real tragedy. It's a good example of how easily the Yeti can be inserted into unrelated scary events.
A cautionary tale about sensationalism. And one other quick thing, the popular image. Lots of people picture a big white furry Yeti, right? Like in the Rudolph cartoon.
Yeah, that Rudolph special probably did more to create the white, abominable snowman image than anything else. But most of the actual accounts, the folklore, the eyewitness reports like Tombazi's or Yoshino's, they tend to describe a creature with dark hair brown, reddish brown, or black.
And usually not gigantic, more like 5 or 6 feet tall.
Often, yes. The truly huge Nialmo type is rarer in the lore. The more common description is something closer to human size, maybe a bit taller or stockier, which in a way makes it potentially more frightening. Not a giant movie monster, but something more grounded, more elusive, possibly hiding just out of sight.
That's a good point. Less B-movie, more uncanny valley.
Hmm.
So we've covered a lot of ground. Ancient fears, demonic interpretations, unsettling relics, different types of Yetis, including genuinely monstrous ones, Western encounters escalating the fear, those chilling screams, attacks on livestock, modern investigations, finding intriguing clues but also room for doubt, and even sensationalism hijacking the legend.
It's a real mix, isn't it? Genuine fear of the unknown and the wild, probable misidentification of known animals like bears, layered with centuries of folklore and the power of suggestion, all contributing to these persistent, scary stories.
Which leaves us, and you the listener, with a lingering question, doesn't it? Given this long, consistent history of scary Yeti stories, the screens, the attacks, the terrifying glimpses, what's really at the core of it all, is it purely the human mind projecting fears onto the vast, empty Himalayas? Or could there still be some kernel of truth, some elusive, perhaps dangerous creature out there that sparked these legends in the first place? What do you think is lurking in those shadows?